Good Monday morning, and thanks for listening to my musing today, which is about truth. Maybe you heard me talk about that in the sermon a little bit yesterday. According to Friedrich Nietzsche in his book The Antichrist, there's only one line in all of the New Testament that's worth reading, and it's attributed to Pilate. Maybe you know this story a little bit. It appears in John 18 when Jesus is before Pilate, and the charge against Jesus is that he's the king of the Jews. And so Pilate is asking, are you the king? And if you're the king, why is all of this stuff happening to you? Jesus says, well, because my kingdom is not of this world, and I have come to testify to the truth. And Pilate says, what is truth? That question in the face of Jesus, according to Nietzsche, is the most profound philosophical question in the entirety of the New Testament. Now, Nietzsche was not exactly a faithful Presbyterian, but the fact that he draws some attention to this line from Pilate, what is truth, maybe deserves some of our attention too. What is truth? How do we understand it? There's a story, maybe you've heard it, about three umpires. They're meeting at a bar after a game or something, and they're talking about how they choose to umpire. The first umpire says, well, I call them like I see them. The second umpire says, well, I call them like they are. And the third umpire says, well, they ain't nothing until I've called them. One umpire acknowledges the need to see things, to process things, that all of the information that he receives about the game comes through his perception. I call them like I see them. The second one says, I call them as they are, that he simply states the truth. It's not about his perception, it's about the way things essentially are. And the third umpire makes a claim to authority. What is truth? Whatever he says it is, because he's the umpire. The thing I like about sports is that especially whenever you need the umpires to huddle, or you need referees to look at the playback, there are thousands upon thousands of people who all saw the same thing. Terrell Owens pretty close to the end zone. Maybe he's bobbling the ball, maybe he's not. What is the truth about the catch? What is the truth about a foul ball? What is the truth about a tennis ball on the line, in the line, out of the line? All of these people are watching. What is the truth? We need umpires in some sense to navigate that for us, which is why we turn to authority. But at the same time, for the second umpire to say things are a certain way, whether we see them that way, call them that way or not, how are we supposed to process that reality that is outside of ourselves? That's a little bit about what I've been musing about, and I'm especially aware, and maybe you sense the urgency a little bit whenever I say talking about truth, whenever the quote big lie is still in the news. Well, it's important. Pilate's question. What is truth? And there's some theories about that. There's some examples about how it's difficult to say what is true, and if you have a little more time, maybe we can talk about those things. So who wins among the three umpires? What are the theories about what is true? The first theory of truth is maybe the one that is most satisfying, and it's called the correspondence theory of truth. The things that we say should correspond to the way things are in the world. And the more they correspond, the truer the statement might be. But here's the challenge. When we say they correspond, how do we know they correspond? I know I've talked about this in another musing. I think about it, I don't know, every couple of months. But whenever what I say is true, have you ever thought about the color of the sky and the color of the grass? What if my blue was your green, so that what I perceived as the sky, you would perceive as the color of the grass? It doesn't really matter because we have associated certain words with blue and green, sky and grass. But how would we know if we were perceiving things differently? Would that change the truth of our statements? They're functional, but do they correspond the same between you and me? If somehow we need an objective measure of the way things really are, well, it's awfully hard to be objective, isn't it? Our trust and our faith in what is objective throws into question this theory of correspondence. Here's another example. Let's say that I'm looking through my telescope and I say, oh look, there's a star. The starlight travels years and years, maybe even centuries to get to us. By the time we see that photon falling on our telescope lens, well, maybe that star has blown up, and it's been blown up for hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of years. So when I say I see a star, that's true in terms of my perception, but if I say there is a star, maybe not. Maybe time has adjusted that. The truth of my statement could be called into question if it's based on my perception of things. So the correspondence to reality is thrown into question, all based on my ability to perceive and articulate what the world actually is. When we go to sports, is he safe? Is he out? Those objective realities are hard to get to. Instead, we depend on authorities like umpires, so that even with the fastest cameras and instant replay, sometimes it's just really hard to tell what some ultimate reality outside of ourselves might be. So that's the correspondence model of truth, the most satisfying, but also the hardest to get to the heart of. How do we name the ultimate reality? Isn't that the question of truth in the first place? So if we can't get to that ultimate reality, or we can't be 100% confident about it, how would we have some other theory about what is truth and how truth works? Well, another theory is the coherence model. The coherence model says that it doesn't really matter how things are when we abstract them, as long as things are coherent in the ways that we speak and think, then that is what is true. What would be an example of that? Well, math. What is 2, if not an idea? Now, I could talk about 2 apples, or 2 bananas, or 2 footballs, or 2 whatever, but there is a different level of truth in the abstract 2 plus 2 equals 4. If we think of computers as calculating machines, everything that we see on a computer, for it to work, has to be coherent in and of itself, which is how we're able to do things like augment reality and put Pokemon around if you look through your phone. Is a Pokemon there if you look through your phone? Really? Truthfully? Well, it doesn't really matter in this theory, because I have my phone and it's coherent, and that's the augmented reality, and I'm able to perceive it and record it. So math, geometry, and even language, words like love or idea itself, well, what is it? Do we have ideas? If it's coherent, then we can say, well, yes, it's true that I have ideas and musings, even if they're not physically represented. What would be a third way of thinking about truth if that gets a little esoteric, thinking about numbers and abstract math and different kinds of geometry? Well, there are the pragmatists, specifically William James, who said, true, in quotes, the word true, is only an expedient in our thinking. What is true? Whatever expedites our thinking. If we can have some functional way of thinking about what is true, like a paradigm about gravity, it doesn't really matter if it is true in the ultimate reality, if there would be different physics for a different age. As long as it's true and works pragmatically, then it's true. And things come into truth and fall out of truth based on our paradigms, our scientific understanding of the world. Is the world made of 4 elements? Well, sort of. That's sort of true until we have the periodic table of the elements. And if that were ever to fall away for some new schema about how the world works and what atoms and molecules are, because again, we've had a few models of the atom, then those things are true for a time. They're true enough, and we don't need to say they're untrue until the paradigm breaks and they no longer expedite our thinking. As a side note, William James also says that what is right is whatever expedites our acting. So what is right, he puts the realm of thinking and acting squarely on us. There's not some objective or divine reality that we need to touch or to correspond to. He's pragmatic about it. What are the brass tacks of how we think and act? And how do our words act as tools to help us manipulate those things? Somewhat on that note, leaning into it, is the constructivist model of truth. This comes not so much from the sciences, but from history and the social studies. We construct truth, and we know that in some ways whenever we say things like knowledge is power, or the inverse of that, the scarier form, that power is knowledge. The third umpire who says, nothing happened until I call it. Who is the president? What's the truth of that? That's been kind of in the news lately. The authority and the power to vest into a person about who is the president, well, there's a pretty drawn-out democratic process for how that happens. And we can say that it is constructed. We construct the idea of a leader. We construct the idea, the rights and responsibilities, throw back to last week, of a president. And then it's by those constructions that we write our history. We claim what is true and what is false, who is a good leader and who is a bad leader. That is specifically what is at work whenever Jesus and Pilate have their interaction, or at least as we read it in John 18. That is the sharp tooth of Pilate's question. Jesus says, I am a king, and I am free, and my kingdom is not of this world. Claiming that truth in the moment means that he's not bound to any other authority. There's nothing that Pilate could do to change Jesus' mind or to change that truth, that reality. Pilate, on the other hand, turns to authoritarian systems, the power that's invested in him by Caesar and by the crowd. And he's trying to navigate those power structures, realizing the truth of the cross as a colonial symbol. It's really interesting to think about that question in that context. That's why Nietzsche draws attention to it. It is remarkable. Here Jesus is standing on the strength of his conviction, of his understanding, of his faithfulness. And that truth stands over all of the power that exists within Rome. So what is true? Who is king of the world? Who rules and reigns in that situation? How do we understand the truth of Jesus' messiahhood, claiming that he's the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, whenever he's crucified? It's kind of the essential question, isn't it? So the constructivist model of power says that power and truth go together. That if I say 2 + 2 = 5, and I've got the biggest ruler, and I've got the grade book, and you don't do what I say, truth is what I say it is. Constructivist. But what if you disagreed with that? What if you had a whole guild of teachers who disagreed about whether 2 + 2 = 4 or 5? What if you had whole divisions of a country who disagreed about who the president was? This would be the consensus model of truth. It's kind of how a democracy works. And we've been put in between these ways of thinking about what is true over the last election as one example. I'm not trying to be too political. It just makes way too good of an example. Terrell Owens' catch. Cowboys fans are pretty confident that it was a catch. Non-Cowboys fans, not so much. They defer to what the umpires said. A consensus model of truth says it takes a community believing the same things together to make something true. And there'd be no way to break out of those groups. Maybe we could have one group as large as the human family that all agrees on something. 2 + 2 = 4. But if there is a group of toddlers who insist that it's not, what's true for them is true for them. These divisions that exist about what is true, what is right, what is good, what is beautiful, sometimes I think we need to acknowledge the ways that functionally we can't get past our own tribes. We can't get past our consensus group. And while we can try to persuade some people about what is true, it might be the case, at least sociologically, that that doesn't hold water for another group. Outside of the election, what is the other clearest example of this? Well, denominations. What are the sacraments, truly? For Presbyterians, we say there are 2, baptism and the Lord's Supper. For Catholics, they say there are 7. For Quakers in the Salvation Army, they say there are 0. For our respective groups, the truth and import of the sacraments, well, it's just different. Wouldn't it be great if all of the churches agreed about what Jesus said we needed to do? Then we'd start washing feet. That could be added as a sacrament. But somehow, by consensus, that's not generally practiced as a sacrament. So looking at these consensus groups and how they operate helps us to determine, at least sociologically, what is true in that group. So those are generally the theories, but I'll leave you with just a couple more thoughts. Have you ever noticed that whenever people say, I've got a true story, it's really true, all true people, the more they say true, the less I believe them. Using the word true, true story, based on true events with true people, believe me, it's true, I know it's true, well, it raises questions. And so the functionality of the word truth, all of this philosophy about what truth is, might diminish our appreciation for what is actually true. Do we need to say that apples are red and that's true? Or can people function by saying apples are generally red? The idea that we diminish things by naming their truth, I think we experience that in day-to-day life. And if it's the case that we don't always have to claim truth to function with an idea of truth, I wonder to what extent the truth is replaceable with the mystery. If Jesus said, I am the way, the mystery, and the life, does that mean that we need to lean in and pay attention to Jesus any more or less? Truth seems to suggest a kind of confidence and a kind of certainty about what we know. But mystery opens up those things that we seek to know. Because the truth is, I don't think we have a handle on the truth as often as we might think. The truth resists simplicity. It takes time to understand the nuance and the details of what is true in the deepest senses of how things work, like an atom or a star. It takes a lot of attention and a lot of battle scars to know how politics work, or how groups work, or how families work, or how the mind works. And so the truth resists simple apples are red, because it's also true that apples are green and yellow and golden, all kinds of colors. How many colors would we see if we didn't automatically think, well, the sky is blue? So the next time you think about what is true, or you're seeking truth, I wonder if you can take a moment to think, what is the mystery here that I'm seeking to explore? Not having taken hold of it, not grasping it firmly, but being willing to dive into the mysteries. I think Pilate was confronted with a difficult situation where he didn't quite understand what was going on with the crowd and with Jesus and the import of that moment. So while we could talk about the truth of the kingdom of God and the truth that Jesus sought to give witness to, for me, I like exploring what the mystery of that kingdom might be, rather than insisting that it truly is here and it was truly inaugurated by Jesus. What's different if we say it was mysteriously inaugurated by Jesus, and it's mysteriously present with us. Does that change open up a world for people to feel and touch and explore those mysteries, those truths? I don't know. You have to let me know in my email. This particular musing, I think, was suggested to me by Pete Bishop, and I finally got around to it. If you have things that you've been musing about or you would like to hear me muse about, please email me at jsnowden@woodschurch.org. Thanks for listening. I hope it truly was a joy for you. I know it mysteriously was for me. I'll see you next week.